Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Graham Noble, Jim Fight, Dave Patterson, and Andrew Moran. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. Joe Biden's America is in ruin. The Bureau of Economic Analysis just came out with the real numbers from the last 3 years. And as any American already knows, inflation is out of control, wages are stagnant, federal spending is out of control, and no one seems to have a savings. Numbers are truly staggering, folks. Luckily, we have Andrew Moran on hand to make us even more morose than ever. Andrew, what do you got?
Well, after reading this report from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the question isn't, are you better off now than you were 2.5 years ago? It's, are you better off than you were now 6 or 7 years ago? So this BA report was quiet release, and it provided revisions to 6 years worth of data from 2017 to 2020. It looked at real GDP growth and PCE, which is another inflation metric. Now, I can go into the numbers if you want to bore everyone to death. Sarah, just tell me the word, and I will give you all the numbers you want. But if not, I'll just give a summary.
Why don't you give us a summary and let everybody pick your brain in a minute?
All right. So the Trump economy, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020 was better than what actually was reported by the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics and all the federal agencies. GDP was higher, inflation was lower. Now, in 2021 and 2022, under Biden, the economy was worse off and inflation was higher than what was reported. So, of course, it's a case of too little, too late for both, voters and for the financial markets and, economic observers in general. Now, I can only imagine what the next updated report in the next few years will show about the current economic or current Bidenomics doctrine and the results it's providing. So I found that BE report absolutely astounding. I was so gobsmacked by it that I posted it in our general chat on Slack. That's how important it was, and nobody reacted, of course, because I guess I'm only interested in that stuff. So that's the state of what the Bureau of Economic Analysis reported.
I personally don't think I need anybody to tell me that my economic outlook under Joe Biden has not been living up to what he promised. I don't have a savings account.
Yeah, but the administration, says you're just too stupid to realize how great the economy is. Paul Krugman, he was on I think CNN, and he said, I've been talked to a lot of economists, and they don't know why people are not so happy about Bidenomics. But you look at the numbers, you can see why they're not happy about Bidenomics.
Right. Well, and I don't know about anybody else on this panel, but I'm going to ask, Graham, where have you been hit the hardest by Biden economics?
Well, I would say, if I'm going to talk about my personal experience of it, it's definitely, I would say, just buying pretty much anything, but, particularly groceries. My grocery bill is ridiculous compared with what it, used to be, 3-4 years ago. And I think, that's how, obviously, I'm kind of maybe preaching to the choir here, but that's how all Americans look at it. They're not looking at it from the perspective of what any economists are saying. And by the way, I don't believe that Paul Krugman is telling the truth when he says that all the economists he talks to thinks the economy is great. There must be something wrong with them. But it comes down to kitchen table economics. Every ordinary American is looking at how much they're paying for groceries, how much they're paying for gas. I happen to be lucky because I'm living in the one place in the country where probably gas is cheaper than anywhere else.
Graham makes a great point about kitchen table economics. If you look at some of the two key consumer sentiments measurements are the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index and the New York Fed's Survey of Consumer Expectations. And they both show not only is consumer sentiment diminishing significantly from its recent high this past summer because of growing inflation expectations, you look at some of the numbers inside the reports and you see that households' financial outlooks from either a year ago or a year from now are just worsening. I mean, they're getting the expectation that they'll be worse off has been growing. You see access to credit, their concerns have been growing. Inflation expectations for things like gasoline, food, tuition, healthcare are all on the rise. So, you had that the slower growth of inflation since hitting that 9.1% peak in June 2022. That's been on the decline. But you see the reacceleration of inflation. So you can understand why, as Graham calls it, kitchen table economics, of why people are souring on this whole idea that the body economy is wonderful, because the GDP came in at 2% as opposed to 1.9%.
Well, it's pretty obvious. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that, when you didn't used to struggle as much, and some people just struggle anyway because they're just not making enough money, or they live in a higher dollar environment. Like, I choose to live where things are really very inexpensive and there are no people to bother me. So, but it's so obvious, and I just don't understand why this administration even has a shot at a re-election campaign. But Dave, what's going on in your neck of the woods? I mean, what's your biggest pet peeve about what's going on in our economic world?
Well, I think it's the cost of the aerospace and defense industry, because the contracts that were let when you had inflation or at 6 to 8%, those contracts are fixed, and the cost of those contracts reflects that inflation rate. And they are multi-year contracts, so you get to live with that regardless of whether the inflation goes down or not. And the second thing that I kind of look at is, so of all the people who are eligible to work, what's the percentage of those who actually have jobs? And despite all of the glee the Biden administration has in the numbers of folks who've come into the workforce, the overall percentage has not changed very much from when Trump was the president.
Well, I know.
Why are people actually returning to the workforce? So for people who are retired or who have retired, why are they returning to the workforce? Because their retirement income has not kept up with the cost of living. And now, you see some of the numbers. You see, credit card debt, for example, that's over $1 trillion. You see the average credit card debt total is around $12,000 for the average household. And then you have the 22% average national interest rate for credit cards. So people cannot keep up with the standard with cost of living. So they have to go back to the workforce. Everyone says, "Oh, see how great, the number of people, in the labor market today," but that's not a great thing, because inflation is eating their livelihoods away, or eating their assets away.
I do know some retirees that have had to apply for SNAP. This is never something they would have ever had considered. The Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program for those food stamps. And they can't live on their Social Security, and their bank accounts are depleted, and they still have car problems and still need to get things fixed and still need to pay the bills and eat. So I do know that is very troubling to that generation. Jim, I think, has probably got it easiest of us all, because whatever walks on his property, he can just shoot it and eat it for dinner. But, he's still got other expenses to think of too. And even if it's a nice warm day, you still got to have AC. So, Jim, what's going on down there?
Yeah, it's all about gas and groceries, even out here in the woods. And I live in a spot where, I'm looking at, I think gas at the gas station nearest my house is about $3.15 a gallon. So I'm actually doing better than the average for any state in the country. But that's still worse than it used to be. The EIA, that's the Energy Information Administration, has a website with a chart, and you can look at the national average fuel price for every single week since April of 1993, 30 years of data on a single web page. And if you look back over the last few years and throughout the entire Trump administration, the gas averaged about $2.30 something a gallon nationally when Trump left office. The highest it was for any week, the worst week in the entire Trump administration, was $3.04, I think. And since we hit the $3 mark for the national average, which we're well above that now, it's pushing closer to $4 a gallon nationally as an average. But once we broke that $3 per gallon mark, we never dropped below it again. You'd find gas for $2.80, $2.90 here and there in spots, but and food's the same way. Well, food and household goods. I mean, remember the egg crisis, toilet paper, hand sanitizer. Maybe it's COVID brain, and we've all just forgotten how to budget. and somehow nobody was eating eggs, wiping their butts, or washing their hands before COVID.
Thanks for that visual.
Yeah.
Andrew, how do we fix all of this? Or Graham, you seem to want to weigh in there, but
The only thing I'm going to add is that in terms of the overall economy, and especially if you go down to the state and local level, there are some additional factors here that are actually exacerbating the problem, and that is the open border, the amount of money that certain states and certain cities are having to pay to house and feed illegal aliens. And then on top of that, you've got the crime epidemic, which is plaguing pretty much all of the largest Democrat-run cities in the country. And you've got retailers packing up, everything from high-end fashion retailers to coffee store chains are literally closing up shop and moving out. So that's obviously affecting the local economy. It's affecting the tax revenue for these cities and these states and counties. So it's a much the economy obviously is linked into these other issues, and they are all problems, one has to say, largely created or made a lot worse by this administration.
I'm with you on that one. Andrew, do you want to close our segment out with a little advice before I have the last word?
Well, not really. I mean, I did a Swamponomics TV recently, and the premise was that the U.S. economy is broken. It's not going to be put back together again like Humpty Dumpty. James and I were talking about this recently, talking about, shelter costs. You have the average national rent and mortgage payments north of $2,000 per month, excuse me. If you take the median sales price of a home today, which is a little more than $400,000, you take a 30-year mortgage of nearly 8%, you're going to pay more than $1 million over that amortization period. People cannot have a roof over their head. People cannot put food in their refrigerator. People can't even drive their cars because everything is just so expensive. I've been joking for years, but Paul Krugman has always said, inflation doesn't exist. But inflation doesn't exist if you don't have a roof over your head, if you don't eat food, if you don't drive a car, if you don't go to college, if you don't have healthcare. So inflation is the main factor of all of this. This whole inflation saga began under Trump. It's been exacerbated by Biden, and the next person, whoever it is not going to resolve it. That's the takeaway. I mean, it's sad. That's the tragedy of it all, but this is the new normal.
Well, folks, not that you didn't know about the Bidenomics spin on your pain in the pocketbook, but look on the bright side. We'll tell you the truth every time. We'll bring Andrew Moran in to scare you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at LibertyNation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.